Last 2 weeks we've been talking about communication with God. This week we're going to be talking about communication among ourselves and what's the best ways that that can happen and the best ways it helps our Christian walk, our faith walk. So I'm going to ask us some questions to begin with. I told you to be thinking about, your homework for this week was to think about who you talk to. Remember that? Anybody remember that? So the first question is, how did you communicate with someone? Any way you communicated this week?
Face to face.
Okay.
Prayer. Facebook.
Amen. Facebook.
Phone call.
Yeah, phone.
Phone.
Text.
Did I hear text?
Yes.
Okay. That's pretty much the ways we communicate most days, most times. Some of us may not have done any of this. Some of us may have done some of it. In days past, we could have put down telegrams and all kinds of crazy things. I don't think I've ever seen a real live telegram. Anybody ever seen a telegram? Okay. So there are different ways that we communicate. Now, the question, when I say with whom, you don't have to tell me names. But, I'm going to put down friend. Okay? Whom else did you, notice my English teacher? Who else did you communicate with? Huh? Family. Trish, did I see your hand? No. No? Okay. The vet. Say what? The vet. Okay. The vet. The vet. Vet.
Doctor.
As in, I'm going to put doctor and then I'll put vet, because we just take care of our 2- and 4-legged ones.
Co-workers.
Customers. Reminds me, I need an appointment next week.
People in Facebook groups that are stranger acquaintance.
How about we just put acquaintance?
Yeah.
That work?
I mean, it's kind of, but we have mutual interests. So, yeah.
Somebody else?
Coworkers.
Co-workers? Did you ever catch yourself any time this week communicating and think, we remember that for Tuesday night?
Church folks.
Church folks, which could be into a lot of these different areas.
My wife.
Huh?
My wife. I guess that's family.
Lord have mercy.
Happy wife, happy life. Brett?
Yourself, family is choice, right?
Okay.
Oh, God.
Somebody else? Pets? Yes.
Yeah.
Some days I talk a whole lot more to my pet than anybody else. It's one of the reasons I got a job, though. I realized his vocabulary was a little limited after a while. But, what else? Okay, now again, not getting into your stuff, but what kind of things, what kind of topics did you talk to these people about?
This week has been all baby stuff.
All baby.
Oh, good.
Do
we have pictures yet?
She's probably got some pictures.
Oh, yeah.
On Facebook. What else?
Pain. Pain.
Paint?
Pain.
Pain.
Do we really have to go outside and run the
Yes,
cables
cold.
in the freezing weather yesterday?
Just say weather. So I guess we could add hubby to that, huh?
Yeah, if you want to.
Work. Work. What else?
Life goals. Life goals.
Life goals.
Alpacas.
Alpacas. Alpacas.
Alpacas. Church.
Trips, what else?
Church. Other people. I didn't say it in a bad way.
What else?
What do you have on the job?
Food? You may think, what does this have to do with anything?
What do you have under God there?
Under God, hubby,
Huh?
Wife,
Hubby,
hubby.
husband.
Wife,
Oh.
Spouse? Yeah, spouse.
House.
That'll work.
You know, that's the weirdest sounding word.
Spouse.
Doesn't it sound like it ought to be part of a pig or something?
Yeah,
Spouse.
spouse. Don't you jump my stand. I don't know how to say it or articulate it, but just overall health, mental, spiritual.
Okay, so we can just put health, right?
Yeah.
School.
Meditation.
Meditation. Pets. Oh, somebody just said a good one.
Money's the big one. Getting closer.
All of these are top, yes, sir.
Money/politics.
Oh. Uh-oh.
He does talk politics.
Someone that lives at my house that is not Rudy does not like to talk about politics.
Oh, the moon. We forgot about the
The
moon.
moon.
The
Blood moon,
eclipse.
or eclipse thing.
That was important to me.
Photography, arts, stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
We talk about all kinds of things. Now, what's interesting is we talked about church, but none of us brought up the fact of talking to other people about God. Now, I know we probably did it, but it seemed like such a given, such a given. But we talk about a lot of things, and we talk to a lot of different people, and we do it in several different ways. And I believe there's some ways that as Christians, as believers, that we can make our conversations better and uplifting. And sometimes it means even having to walk away from a conversation. You ever had to do that?
Yes.
You know, it's just not going in a way that's good, and you can't necessarily turn the tide, and so you just step away. So we're going to talk for a few minutes tonight, and I gave you, on your sheet, there are blanks that you can fill in if you want as we work through this. Looking about some ways that we can work on our conversations.
Yes, ma'am.
And if there's any left over, just hold on till we get back to it again. Turn to Ephesians chapter 4. Now, when I was doing some studying in preparation on this, I kept getting sent to Paul's letters to the new little churches. And I thought, well, what was that? Why was he having to talk to / fuss at / instruct these new Christians so much about their conversations? Why do you think that was? Why was he talking to the new churches, the new Christians, so much about their conversations with one another?
Maybe they needed to rethink how they were doing it.
Maybe they needed to rethink how they were doing it. They were coming from a lot of different backgrounds and directions. Sometimes you just had to kind of figure out where somebody was coming from. And their thinking, their way of living, their way of approaching things were changing. Now, I don't know about you, but the closer I get to God, I see a difference in the way I talked about and to and with people from years before that. Not perfect by any means, but as we get closer to God and we let God take more of us, then it changes some how we talk to other people. I was in a grocery store one time years ago, right after the shooting, and the cashier, young man, was driving me crazy. It's like he was doing everything by pencil in his head at the register. And I was gritting my teeth and gritting my teeth. And I was just ready to say, "Dear God." And he said, "Aren't you that preacher?"
Yeah.
You know? And I was so glad that I gritted my teeth one more time, because knowing that I was, an impact that would have had on him if I'd bitten his head off like I was thinking about doing. Now, granted, I shouldn't have been thinking about doing it, but at least it didn't get past my teeth. In Ephesians chapter 4, somebody read verses 25 through 27, 25, 26, 27.
What this adds up to then is this: no more lies, no more pretense. Tell your neighbor the truth. In Christ's body, we're all connected to each other, after all. When you lie to others, you end up lying to yourself. Go ahead and be angry. You do well to be angry, but don't use your anger as fuel for revenge. And don't stay angry. Don't go to bed angry. Don't give the devil that kind of foothold in your life.
Whoa. The message gets right to it, doesn't it? It gets right to it. Let me just share with you from NIV so you have a little bit of comparison. Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to their neighbor, for we are all members of one body. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. The one who has been stealing must steal no more, but must work. It goes on into verse 28. So let's talk a little bit about what this scripture has to say about how we're to talk to one another. Now, Paul was writing to early Christians, and so he's talking about how Christians should talk to one another, but I think it's how we ought to talk to people in general. You know, I'm a little bit concerned when I hear somebody on Sunday talking one way, and then I overhear them in Walmart a few days later, and it's a whole different person talking. And we've all done that. We've all done that. But based on this verse, we are encouraged to speak only the truth. Speak only the truth. If you tell the truth, you don't have to worry about getting caught in a lie. You know, some of our politicians right now are struggling because they've told the truth several different ways and several different incantations. But we speak only the truth. You know, in verse 25 there it clearly says, no more lies. This thing I was studying encourages in the midst of this to use no 100% words. I don't know if you know what that means. Not anyone in the world is all bad. No one in the world is all perfect. And we tend to use those always words. They always sing that stupid song at church. They always do this, this, and this. And so we really need to avoid those 100% words. The scripture kind of encourages us to not be calling people names. Now, I do that sometimes if I can't think of your name. I'll go to Sandra and say, who's that woman that sits over there on the third row from the back, and she'll say it's da-da-da, like that.
You're calling by the wrong name.
Or I can call them by the wrong name. Jeff all the time. No name calling. And, you know, this isn't that kind of joke. Like, I call one person in this room kid, and I'm the only one that gets allowed to do that. That's not the kind of thing. But you know what we mean about calling people names? That derogatory, negative stuff. There's nothing in this little passage here to these early Christians in Ephesus that says we need to be doing that. And no intentional lies. Now, why do you think the person I was studying put in the word intentional?
It's mean.
It's mean. It would be mean to do an intentional. How could you unintentionally lie?
If you think you know the truth, but
If you didn't know the truth or the details or the whole story, you know as well as I do, you know when you're fibbing and when you're not. Now, sometimes I call it split that fundamentalist hair. My mother would not ever lie for me under any circumstances. There was a woman when I was growing up, a girl named Martha, and Martha would call and talk your ear off. Nobody wanted to talk to Martha as much as Martha wanted to talk. So most of the people, when she would call, if they didn't want to talk to her, their mother would say, oh, she's in the tub. Because, you know, we didn't have phones then that went all over the house. My mother would only do that if I took my shoes off, quickly walked in the bathroom, stepped over, fully dressed, and stood in the tub. Then she would tell Martha, I couldn't talk. I was in the tub. Bless her heart. So no intentional lies. No intentional lies. And last of all, no exaggeration. Oh my goodness. No exaggeration. If you tell the truth, and you know the truth, there's no need to exaggerate. You know people that do? They've always got the best, the most, the smartest. And even if you know they don't, this whole part here, Paul was telling the church at Ephesus, just speak the truth. The truth is enough. The truth is enough. Why do people exaggerate?
Make themselves think they look better to someone else, probably.
Make themselves look better, sound better. Yeah. And you know, most of us, if we just be us, that's more than enough. More than enough. Can you think how this would affect things in a church? In a church setting? If we just spoke the truth, we didn't exaggerate. We could easily get up here and say the church needs more money. That's not exaggerating. One time back in the early days while I was gone to conference, somebody got up and let the word out that the church was going to close. We were going broke. We needed to close. It was going to close. And somebody in the community who wasn't even part of the church, when I got to work that Monday morning, came over, pounded on the door down on Kirk Avenue, handed me a $100 bill because he didn't want the church to close. And I said, I appreciate the $100 bill, but the church wasn't closing. Verses 26 and 27 that we've already read. Go ahead and be angry. Do well to be angry, but don't use your anger as fuel for revenge. Don't stay angry. Don't go to bed angry. Don't give the devil that kind of foothold. One of the ways we can avoid this is to keep current. Keep current in the moment. Deal with the issue at the moment. You ever had to talk to somebody and they don't want to talk about right now, but they want to think about all the things that happened in the past and bring them all right back here again today? If we just communicate with each other on the current things. Now, y'all reminded me of that commercial where the guy says, such and such insurance doesn't hold grudges. And he looks at his wife and says, they don't hold grudges. Okay. Keep it current. Keep it current. What time frame should you handle relationship problems according to these verses? Before you go to sleep. Before you go to sleep. Or in the case for church, before service. We should not delay issues and go to bed on them or go into service with them. That's a hard one. That's a hard one. I've seen this so often with, not this parking lot, because I'm usually here first, but I've been in churches where you see people pull in the parking lot, and they're just like, and they shut that car door, and suddenly, everything's great and wonderful. Now, I'm not saying stay in the car until you fight it out, you know, but that brings, I believe that brings bad energy in. And I think it also will block what you get from church that day. It'll block that up. Well, I'm stepping on toes, I guess. I'm getting tickled at this. Why would it say don't go to bed when you're angry with someone? What sense does that make? You know, if you both go to sleep, you shut up and it's not fighting anymore.
But you usually don't go to sleep.
Usually don't go to sleep.
Well, at least one of the two doesn't.
Yeah, the right one doesn't go to sleep, right. It doesn't get resolved. And what I think happens, and I'm going to pull this into church too, I think what happens is you get up the next morning and that little ball of resentment just stays right there. But you cover it over with some cereal, some yogurt. You just keep going until the next time. And then it pops up. Same thing with church issues. If we don't resolve them, then they're going to pop up under another heading another time. Now, not everything can always be completely settled and calmed and resolved, but it can be talked out. It can be expressed. Because when you have a church of any side, whether it's 10 or 10,000, there are going to be some people that think one way and some that think another way. I've seen churches split up over what color to do the carpet, which side to put the piano organ on.
I was going to say, it seems to me that people really, they talk about agreeing to disagree, but they have a really hard time actually doing it.
Right. Agree to disagree, but it's right there. And the next time it comes up, it's right back there with you. Am I talking, do you understand what I'm talking about? Am I the only one that does this, or has done this? And it also says, somebody turn over to 1 Corinthians 13:5 for me. 1 Corinthians 13:5. I've heard this in lots of weddings.
Love's not envious, boastful, arrogant, or rude. I mean, 5 to me just says, or rude.
Well, it
It
should be
does
somewhere
not
where it
insist,
says,
sorry, it does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful.
somewhere in there it says, keeps no account
Keeps
Of
no
wrong.
record
of
of
wrongs.
wrongs.
Yeah.
Keeps no account of wrongs. If we want to have effective communication between one another, we need not to keep that little list of offenses. Some people can tell you about somebody hurt their feeling in second grade and they're still mad at them. Somebody can tell you about the first time somebody hurt their feelings in church, no matter what church it was, no matter how many years ago, but they can bring it up just like that. Effective communication, effective love doesn't keep that list. Okay, that sounds good. What do you do with that list then? What do you do with those hurts? Well, the nice sweet answer would be you turn them over to Jesus. Sometimes you have to just determine that when it comes up, to say, go away. When it comes up, say, go away. If you're in a restaurant and somebody brings you a part of your meal and it's something that you really don't like or they've done something nasty to it, you don't just sit there and eat it and be quiet. You send it back. Same thing. Same thing. When those offenses come up, you can acknowledge your part in them and hand them back. Because they're going to come up. They're going to come up. I'm going to have to separate some people in here before too long. And the other thing is, in this passage it talks about, the passage from Ephesians, handle it when it comes up. If you come into church on Sunday, this coming Sunday, and you look at me and I've got 25 things on my mind, and my back's hurting, and I'm just already kind of worn out. We haven't started church yet. And you look at me and I just kind of look at you and walk on, and you go, what is wrong with her? Why is she mad at me? And all through church you sit there thinking, my pastor should be friendlier than that. Why is she acting like that? Now, some of you know people who've done that kind of thing. It's a whole lot better if you come up here and say, Catherine, what's wrong? What's wrong? Are you mad at me? What's going on? Same thing with friends, especially on this. Facebook. Facebook is simply words printed on a screen, and you can interpret those a million different ways. So sometimes you have to back up and say, what did you mean by that? Or, and if you don't want to do it in public for everybody to see it, there's that little private message thing. Or, did you misunderstand what I said? Otherwise, everybody sits around getting madder and madder and madder. Communication. Communication. Is this making any sense to you? And then another thing that our conversation should do, based on Ephesians 29-30, which says, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful for building others up, according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, with whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. The fancy word that goes in that first blank is a word that's King Jamesy called edify. E-D-I-F-Y, which means build up, encourage. Edify others, don't attack. You come into church on Sunday, and you know that Rhonda's dog is really, really sick. This Rhonda is really, really sick. And maybe you've seen on Facebook, you've seen a prayer request about it. And she comes in and she's really sad and heavy looking. Instead of assuming she's mad at the world, instead of assuming she's mad at you, Might be good to just go over and say, I think the puppy's going to be okay. See how much more helpful that is than assuming? You know what assume means? Okay. But that edifying means to be encouraging. It means to be encouraging, to edify, to encourage, not attack. We're not going to look at these other scriptures. You can turn and look at them later. But you see in Timothy that the goal of instruction, the goal of encouraging, the goal of helping somebody is simply love. The goal is love. It's not that you can say, I'm right, you're wrong. It's to bring them more into love. Bring them more into love. And in Proverbs, that'll be a good one for you to look up, because what it basically says is don't intervene in other people's issues. Yeah. So you didn't even have to read it, you knew. Oh my goodness. How many church fights, neighborhood fights, family fights have taken place because somebody had to put their 2 cents worth in it, and they didn't have $1 in it to begin with. Now, why do we do that? Why do we jump into other people's business/fights?
Want to be right.
Want to be right? Sometimes we want to defend one side or another. Sometimes we think we know best, and we may have been there. We think we know some other ways around it. But in Proverbs, it simply says, don't get into other people's issues. Again, let's put it in a church setting. Let's say that I know that Kelly and Sandra are fussing with each other. I could just tell by looking at them. The morning I fell, I looked at Kelly and said, you having a bad day today? You remember me saying that? 2 minutes later, I'm flat on my back. Talk about being struck down. But anyhow.
You didn't know she had that power.
Yeah. But you know, you can see that, and you can even say to them, hope you guys have a better day, you know, or you can say, praying for you. The last thing you need to do is catch one place and one the other and say, what's going on? Y'all having a fight? What's up? Okay? Now, I know them well enough, they'll probably tell you it's none of your business. Okay? But see how that could just stir the pot? Stir the pot. Communication says that the goal of our communication is love. When I taught in Christian schools, all the classes had to have this little, motto or something. And I wanted my kids to be effective communicators of the gospel of Christ. I want my church folks and myself to be effective communicators of the love of Christ. The love of Christ. But sometimes that means staying out of each other's business. I'm going to skip over to Proverbs 25:8. You don't have to turn if you don't want to. It's got there, you can read it later. Proverbs 25:8 says, do not bring hastily into court, for that which you will do in the end puts your neighbor to shame. Think before you say anything. Proverbs was saying, don't hurry up, don't rush to pull somebody into court and sue them. We're the most litigious, litigious, whatever country in the world. People will sue you over whether you looked at them or you didn't. And the Proverbs saying, think before you say anything. For years, my mother was convinced that there was no connection between my brain and my mouth. The mouth just... The mouth just spoke. And if we read James 1, we'd see that we should, you've heard this verse so many times, slow to anger and slow to speak. Slow to anger. I love that because it doesn't say you're never going to get angry, because we are. But slow to anger and slow to speak. If you're quick to anger and quick to speak, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. Loving communication among believers with each other and with the world means that we stop and think. We don't fly off on a handle. And then we're slow to speak.
Or type. Or type.
Or type. Yeah. Yeah. The older I get, the less I talk. I know it's hard for some of you to believe, but the older I get, the less I talk. Because more often things will come up, and you've seen me do this sometimes, and I just have to shut my mouth. I know there are people all in heaven saying, "Thank you, Jesus," finally. And then if you looked at the verse in Proverbs, we'll look at another time. It says to hear before you rebuke. Now, I didn't like that word this lesson had. But rebuke, I always think of as this, smacking somebody. But rebuke can actually mean correct. To put on the right path. To help get going in the right direction. And if we don't hear what someone's saying, we're very likely to misunderstand and go the different direction. Have you ever heard someone say something and it kind of riled you up until you listened the second time to hear what they had said? Or you heard it in context? I love walking around this church before church on Sunday. And the little snippets of conversation. There are times I have to kind of like, wait a minute. There's got to be a bigger story to this. I know they didn't mean what they just said. But if we listen before we react, if you like, better than rebuke, listen. And sometimes it means listening to the words, and sometimes it means listening to the heart. And then the other verse in Ephesians we're referring back would say to be forgiving. To be forgiving. Is anyone in here who's never had their feelings hurt? I doubt it. Some of us may have even had our feelings hurt in the last 24 hours by what someone would say. And sometimes it may not be the words, but the tone in which it's said. There's somebody at my house who's not Rudy, but sometimes we have to. Some people don't like their name used. Sometimes we have to remind each other that it's not what we said, but the tone that we used. The tone that we used. So there's some other verses, we'll talk about these in a minute, but the whole idea of this communication between believers, between other people in general, is if we can act from the foundation of love, it makes all the difference in the world. Because if you're out of line, if you're headed in a bad direction, out of love, I may speak to you about that. I may say, it looks to me like you're headed, you're cruising for a bruising. It looks to me like you're headed for trouble, and can we talk about this? If I'm ever talking to you about advice and I say you might consider thinking about, that means you really ought to do it. Okay, I'll give that away. Usually I wait till people figure that out. But we need to communicate. We need to tell people when they've done something well. We need to say thank you. It doesn't cost us a penny to say thank you to someone. We need to tell somebody I appreciate what you do. We need to tell somebody you make me laugh. Because so often those words don't get said until they're said in a funeral. Until they're said on a deathbed. And we need to talk about things that are important to us. Think about these things we said we talked about. Now, goodness knows I wrote this one the biggest because it's the most important, okay? Thank you. Baby. We had to be sure to bring that up. But think about all the things we can talk about. People think because I'm the pastor, all I want to talk about is the Bible. People may think that if you're into a certain thing, that's all you want to talk about. I've been to have my hair done by Rhonda before, and talking about hair is not all she wants to talk about. It's not. I said variety. But we need to talk, especially if we're hurting or confused. Now, most of us, when we're hurting or confused, we want to isolate. We don't want to tell anybody about it. And there will be some people you want to tell about it, and they're not going to care. But if you keep checking out and trying, you'll find somebody who will listen. When I worked at Dollar Tree that little bit of time, I'd always tell people, how are you? And one guy said, oh, you don't want to know. And I said, I'll be glad to listen as long as you're buying something. My boss will let me listen as long as the ding's going when I'm scanning things. But we need to find somebodies that we can share things with. On the bottom of your sheet, there are what was called one another commands. One another commands. And I used the word that the writer of this material I was looking at used because they're not really suggestions. They're things that how we need to treat and act and speak to one another. We're only going to read a few of them. I want somebody to look up John 13:34 and someone else Romans 14:9. John 13:34 first. Whenever you find it, speak out.
Got it. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You should also love one another.
Boy, how complicated and hard to understand is that. Jesus says, a new commandment I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. Doesn't say if you like the way I talk, doesn't say if you like the way I dress, or say if you like the way I worship. New commandment, love one another. And Romans 14:19.
Let us then pursue what makes for peace and for mutual upbuilding.
Okay. Let us therefore make every effort to do what leads to peace and mutual edification. Remember that word we learned a while ago? Edification. And in the Message, I love it, says, so let's agree to use all our energy in getting along with one another. Use all our energy in getting along with one another. That's the kind of message that's in all these verses. In all these verses. And I worked at trying to get them in order the way they come in the Bible. Because I wanted you to see that from the Gospels all the way through, almost to the end in 1 Peter, over and over and over, the message is, love one another. Speak the truth to one another. Say encouraging things to one another. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit about self-talk. We've talked about how we talk to God and how we talk to each other. Next week, we're going to talk about self-talk. And this is the important thing to be thinking about for next week. What do you talk to yourself about? What do you talk to yourself? Goody. Now, what do you talk to yourself about? For me, that's one of the biggest challenges. I can handle talking to God. I've been doing that as long as I can remember. I can pretty much talk to anyone. I always said my mother could talk to a fence post for 20 minutes before she'd realize it was a fence post. I got some of that from her. But what about that self-talk? And what does God say about how we should talk to ourselves? I encourage you to read these other verses through the week. Maybe take some instruction from those. You maybe want to make one of them your little motto for a while. Don't forget to be thinking about how you can help Edward Doss and the prayer requests we mentioned before. Any additional prayer requests thought of since we came in?
For her to not be sick anymore. For her to not be sick anymore.
Yes, for Kelly not to look sweaty and be sick anymore. Loving God, we ask that you continue to bless us. I thank you for these folks who so faithfully come out to study your word, to grow, to learn new words, and to learn new ways of thinking. And I ask, loving God, that you give us the courage to let you speak through us, sometimes to speak instead of us, to help us learn how we can truly be encouragers of one another. And in that encouragement, even to people who don't know you or even believe in you, in that encouragement, they'll find out that somehow somebody